Christopher Wilson is the Senior Associate at the Wilson Center's Mexico Institute, where he leads research and programming on regional economic integration and the U.S. Mexico border affairs. And that's what we're going to talk about today. A new report, the U.S. Mexico Border Economy in Transition. Tell us about the process, Chris, of how this report came about.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting pieces of this report, John, and thanks for taking the time to speak with me today. We actually spent this last year, 2014, going to 4 different border communities, both sides of the border, San Diego, Tijuana, Nogales in Arizona and Sonora, El Paso and Ciudad Juarez in Texas, and then deep in South Texas, the Laredo and Nuevo Laredo. And we engaged the communities there. We asked them what it is, the people who actually cross the border every day, the people who are living this sort of big NAFTA relationship that was maybe created in the capitals, but where it happens day to day is the border. And we asked them what works about the border and the way it's managed, what doesn't work, how it is it that we can change the border to make the whole region more competitive, both in terms of commerce, but also in terms of the people living and working there, their own human capital, their ability to move from cheap labor to advanced manufacturing. There's a whole host of issues that are covered in there.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, instead of some sort of distant academic type of research, you're essentially holding almost like a border-long town meeting.
That's right. That's exactly what it was. It's essentially a series of town halls where we can take in the great ideas that are already there from people that are living this on a day-to-day basis.
So tell us, let's start, we'll talk about some good ideas later. Let's start with some problems. What are people encountering? What are the issues or the challenges around the border that people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are 2 probably really big ones. The first is wait times, just actually the process of getting across the border. Really, after 9/11, it's become increasingly complicated as we've added layers of security on the border. They haven't necessarily, they've made it harder for the bad guys to get across the border, but they've also made it harder for the good guys to get across the border. People going to school, going to work, going shopping, all the things that we want to be happening so there are vibrant communities and vibrant economies are harder to do because the border's hard to cross.
Is there a sense that the security is greater than the actual risk?
I think there's definitely a sense that the hype is different than the reality on the ground. And that's one of the other reasons to do this is because here in Washington and in the nation's capitals, we hear about migration and drugs as the issues that are border issues. But no, the economy is a border issue also. And people are living that on a day-to-day basis and rarely actually confronted with threats of terrorism and things of that nature.
Yeah, and so give us some insight into some of these innovative ideas that the promotion for your event teases out. What are some that jump out at you that you find particularly impressive or interesting?
Yeah, I think one of the most exciting ones, or a couple of ideas sort of combined together, is a notion that we can do joint urban planning. So cities like El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, they talk about themselves all the time as a single city that just happens to have an international border running straight through the middle of it. And that's true in many ways, but after 9/11 and the increased security, after there's been increases of violence in some border towns, there's really less people going back and forth across the border every day. And so how is it that in this more complicated environment, you can make sure that that fabric of a unified binational society actually stays together? And I think you have to be more and more creative about it. So decades ago, there was a trolley that connected El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. Well, that's long gone. But how could we recreate that? How could we have binational public transportation that connects cities as if they were a single city, which in fact I think they really are. But to do that now, you're going to have to add layers of security on top of it. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that it's harder to get there.
Is there anything close to that as a model we could look at in a border town that has something that is closer to what people would like to see?
Well, I think in some ways what it is it's just imagining what things were like 20 years ago and saying, how can we do it again in this new country? Because we'll never turn the page back on 9/11 and some of the security infrastructure that's needed now. But how can we have a community that's just as closely woven together as it was then, with all the new security that we need on top of it?
So how will you communicate policy recommendations? And I think you have 2 governments that are the audiences for this.
Yeah, multiple governments even, because it's also state and local governments. So that's one of the key pieces. I mean, the great thing about a process like this is we were able to engage the representatives that work here in Washington representing the border in Congress. So they were at our forums, and some of the state legislators were at our forums. And so now what we're going to do is just take this back to them, but where their homes are. So after our launch tomorrow, we'll be going up to Capitol Hill for a briefing. We'll be in Mexico City presenting the report shortly, and then hitting some of the border communities and their state capitals along the way also.
I would imagine that the legislators and local governments involved along the border region or representing districts along the border would be very excited about this because they deal with a Congress that is somewhat ignorant about the realities that they are actually aware of.
Yeah, they're our biggest advocates, and I think that they really appreciate this type of work, something that, really, one thing that's challenging in the border is that people don't necessarily communicate from El Paso and to cross to San Diego down to Brownsville in Texas. And so we're finding a way to bring together all the voices of the border and bring them to Washington so they can speak with a single voice here. And that's, that's a very powerful thing actually in terms of the legislative process. And so those members of Congress that do that work are, the ones that are standing up right next to us. And that's why we have 3 members of Congress helping us with the launch tomorrow, because this is their work also.
I'm going to flag my question as a silly question. Sometimes we leave the viewers and the guests to do that, but it's a somewhat silly question, but I'm wondering if there's an answer, and just going fishing. If we were going to look at the border as 1, not functioning well at all, 10, peak functioning, all the things we need to happen are happening, where is it today?
I think we're actually at a 5 or a 6. Now, a lot of people that live it day to day would be much more pessimistic about it because they wait in line all the time and they're fed up with that. But I think what we have now is a framework that works, but it hasn't yet been implemented. And what I mean by that is we've moved beyond the notion that you gain in security at the loss of economics and fluidity and efficiency at the border to a notion that you can actually have it all at once. And there are mechanisms and policy options that you can put in place that actually improve security and efficiency at the same time. We're just at the beginning of actually implementing all of those, though. And so that's sort of the next step is actually figuring out ways to bring those ideas to fruition. So some of those things are like trusted traveler programs. So people who, go through a strict vetting process so they can move quicker back and forth across the border.
Lines at the airport.
Just like global entry or pre-check at the airport, but at the border.
Yeah, well, good. It wasn't a silly question because you had a very good answer. Let me finally ask you, people who are interested in actually seeing the entire report, where can they do that?
Yeah, please go to our website, the Mexico Institute website at the Wilson Center, and you'll find it front and center there under our border research.
Downloadable PDF?
Please download it in PDF. We've got hard copies here at the Wilson Center as well.
And also, I should let you know that on our website, the event that Chris has referenced and we've both talked about, that is a lengthy event, including the members of Congress and others, will be archived on the video on the Mexico Institute website as well.
Thanks a lot, Jen.
Thanks.